going to transition and talk about the other show we've been reviewing on a weekly basis, and that's the most recent episode of DC's The Penguin. Episode 3 just premiered this past Sunday, and so we're finally going to get to it and address it. Episode 3 is entitled Bliss, and so this is 3 out of 8 of this limited series, and certainly we expected some things to happen in terms of character revelations, more backstory to be explored, and I think that turned out to be true here. But of course, this show is continuing to move at a pretty good pace and a pretty good clip here in terms of just everything that's going on. So a lot to get to within today's episode. But before we dive into spoilers, just start off with our general big picture thoughts. What did you think about this most recent episode of DC's The Penguin?
I think we're still on track for what I think Penguin to be. This show seems to really, really want to separate. I think Penguin as, like, of course, this super silly character who does bird related kind of crimes that we've seen in the past, and like they're trying to do that pretty much veer as far away from Danny DeVito as we can. You know what I'm saying? He's like, let's go in the opposite direction. And I think this episode is like, yes, this is like the establishing, like, let's not go there at all. Like, this is something completely different. And I'm enjoying that, man. I'm enjoying, again, the realistic feel of it all. Everything in this episode does not feel, to be honest, the Batman didn't even have to be on the stamp of this episode. And I'd be like, oh, this is a really cool crime drama show featuring an anti-hero. You know what I'm saying? Very Breaking Bad, Sopranos. And I'd be like, oh yeah, cool. This is pretty decent. And I think they're doing right by that. And I enjoyed it, man. I enjoyed this episode. I think it was another good iteration. They did what I thought they was going to do. The show does revolve a lot around Victor as a character. I was hoping they would do that. They did it, fleshed it out, made it feel good. And so this show somehow finds a way to surprise me every time. I'm like, oh, this is normal. And then something not normal happens. And you're like, wow, never mind. This is still subverting my expectations. And I think anytime anybody can do that, they're doing something right or something good. So I'm still really enjoying this thing, man. Everything's not perfect. There's some beats in there that I'm like, I don't know if it's a pacing thing or a storyline thing, but sometimes there's some energy I think that can be placed in that can be moved to other places. But overall, I think still really, really solid episode, and I'm enjoying it so far.
I like this episode a lot. I was really, really, really enamored by it, and I think it definitely surpasses what we saw last week with episode 2, just because it does get to, I think, some of the heart and the root of the show in terms of what it's about and what it's trying to say, not only about the characters, but of course just about this city, Gotham, and what it means and ultimately how it impacts everybody that's involved. And so I really, really liked it. This is one of those things where if we knew that this show was going to be a multi-season show, this is something that they would probably explore in like season 2, season 3, but now we're having to do it in episode 3 because we don't know if it's going to come back or not. I would bet it's going to come back, but not knowing that that's going to be a guarantee, they kind of have to just like, let's get to it now. Let's start to present these conflicts and these really difficult character choices very early on to just like show how all of these things are going to shape out and ultimately impact the people that are involved. But I liked it a lot. I thought it was really, really good. And I think that the focus of it and the tie-ins to the Batman, the movie itself, were really well done. So I had a good time with it. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the events of episode 3 entitled Bliss. So if you've not seen it, definitely spoiler warning, go watch it and finish the rest of the conversation here. And speaking of tie-ins, let's just start there really with the beginning and the opening moments of the episode. We get direct correlations to what happened in the Batman. As if you've seen that movie from 2022, you know that the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, had this master plan. He distracted Batman for a good moment in time and ultimately flooded Gotham. Now, in that movie, the primary focus of that third act and that flooding scene was Batman having to show up at Gotham Square Garden to save the people that were there at this press rally for the possible mayor elect Rio Vidal. And so it was a big sequence, of course, but it was very much focused on just one area and really the characters we had been following in that movie. But for this show, they are tying in like, oh, this affected a good chunk of the city, and we see Victor comes from a particular neighborhood, and this neighborhood is, I guess, considered lower income in this universe in particular. And In fact, it's called I forget the name of it exactly.
Crown
Crown Point,
Crown
I think.
something.
It
Yeah, I
might be
keep wanting to
Crown
call it Crown
Point.
Heights.
I know
But yeah.
exactly. It's definitely like, trying to reminisce, off of Brooklyn sort of neighborhoods, but I think it's called
Mhm.
Crown Point. But we see Victor's family. He's Dominican, and so we see sort of early moments with his family in his apartment, his mom, his father, his sister. We get a bit of a sense of the relationship that they have with each other. But ultimately, he goes to a rooftop to visit his girlfriend, and in the midst of that whole thing, the seawall explodes, the flooding happens. Riddler's plan is now in full motion, and we see that directly impacts Victor because it kills his family, and it leaves him
Yep.
orphaned. And so really
Mhm.
in those opening moments, they show us just the true damage of what happened there. Like, hey, yeah, it might have been this big quote unquote cool action sequence, but no, there's real life ramifications. Like, we kill off probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people due to this massive flooding event that occurred, which I remember, we talked about in the review itself, very reminiscent of Katrina and what happened
Mhm.
to New Orleans in 2005. And so, what did you think of that? And how did you feel ultimately knowing what it was going to lead to? Because it took me a while to kind of catch on that that's what they were doing. And then ultimately,
Yeah.
when you hear those explosions and you see stuff happening, it's like, oh no, this is what they're going for. How did you feel about that whole opening sequence and that exploration of Victor's backstory?
First of all, I think they killed it. I was like, wow, this is how you start an episode. This is how you start a flashback. Like bro, I didn't know what was happening, and I think that's what got me. I was like, oh, that's where we're going with this. Whoa, okay. I just didn't expect that. I think, episode 1, episode 2, anytime we see Vic, he's always somewhere else in his mind, or sometimes they talk about his neighborhood and somebody's like, yeah, that neighborhood, blah 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 blah, and you're like, okay, but what's happening there? What does it look like? What's gone down? And here we finally see what went down in first 2 episodes as well. I was trying to figure out, okay, why is Victor here? What are they trying to get us to see with this character? And they're trying to get us to see this kid lost his whole family in probably what, 10 seconds. Like, it couldn't have been that long, you know what I'm saying? Probably 30 seconds max. This kid lost his whole family, and a lot of people lost the entire neighborhood. And not only that, but his girlfriend was there with him, who also lost her whole family. Like, everybody probably on that rooftop lost their families. There are probably very few people in that survived, kind of in that way, man. And so I thought it was a dark way for sure to start the episode, but it gave me so much context on who Vic was supposed to be and the family in which he had. He came from a loving family. They didn't have everything, but seeing how his dad was, seeing how his mom was, who his sister was like, oh, that's why you do the things you do. That's why you act the way you act. It all started to make sense. So I think they did a tremendous job in that opening scene, setting again not only the scene for who Vic was as a character, but to me, this is like the definitive 10 minutes of probably Batman 2. You know what I'm saying? What Gotham is going to look like when we get back there, of like what the remnants of that whole incident was going to look like. Because we've kind of seen it again in episode 1 and 2, but here was like, no, look, y'all, this is what happened in a small ass neighborhood when those bombs exploded. Can you imagine what all of Gotham must look like? So I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, and anytime you can tie it in with the larger, sort of mythology that you've built up, that stuff is it's going to be great. And I think with a lot of superhero films and television shows, in particular post Man of Steel, there has been an increased responsibility, I think, on the part of filmmakers to say, okay, if something massive happens to an entire city of people, or to an
Mhm.
entire community, how do we actively address the repercussions of that? There's always the funny memes that go around on Twitter where it's like, Avengers, we saved the city, and then the city is underneath like complete rubble.
Decimated.
It's decimated. And that's an idea that's like very much real, to where
Mhm.
I think things kind of got out of hand for a while, and it's like, so we're not going to talk at all about those 13 skyscrapers that tipped over and fell, like
Right.
probably thousands of people there. We're not ever going to address this massive flooding. They had to address it, and by way of creating a character that's directly impacted by it, just brilliant. And I think just
Brilliant.
showcasing it was amazing, and it immediately creates even more empathy and a better and stronger relationship with Victor as a character. And you just understand,
Mhm.
like, he doesn't have anybody really. His
Yeah.
girlfriend at this point, who's kind of moved on by the time
Yeah.
we reach him in this show, she would be the only person that he could connect with. But ultimately, he met Oz, before they decided to reconnect here. So Oz is really the only person he can have any sort of relationship with. Probably find new meaning. All of that stuff is just super important, and I think even more important is something that they touched on in the early part of the episode, but they don't fully unpack it until later on. But this idea of like fatherly figures and fatherhood
Mm-hmm.
in this show, because Vic had somewhat of a back and forth. I don't want to say contentious, but him and his father, they clearly would go at it, not always see eye to eye about certain things, but he
Mm-hmm.
absolutely respected his father and really, I think, adored, what his father tried to achieve and the lifestyle that he tried to give them. It wasn't the world. He didn't have all the resources at his disposal, but his father was there to try to keep the family together. But now that his father is gone, he has this Oz, sort of avatar to step in to kind of be that new figure for him, to be that new person for him. And we see that several times. I mean, there's even like the part where they're having dinner with one another, and you
Mm-hmm.
see Vic kind of explaining like his backstory to Oz, and Oz, he's like, "Oh wow, I didn't know that about you." And you see Oz even show some empathy, with Vic, and they toast ultimately, to his father and what he meant to him. How did you feel about those threads also kind of being explored here? This establishing of the trust between these two,
Mm-hmm.
and Oz ultimately, I think, taking on more responsibility of Vic as a human, as a person. But of course, there's a push and pull there, because there is still sort of an opportunity and an out for Vic if he wants to. Like,
Yeah.
he's not all the way in yet, and there could possibly be a
Mm-hmm.
way where if he wanted to leave, he possibly could make that decision.
Yeah, I think they're doing the right thing here story wise. Why wouldn't Oz, I think, respect what Victor is going through? Because, like I said a long time ago, we could have killed that kid a long time ago and kept moving, but he intentionally seen something in him. Of course, I think relating again to his speech impediment that he has, but he did want to kind of be a mentor to this kid. And what makes this so interesting in between the relationship between Vic and his dad, he's talking to his dad like, "Dad, don't you want more? Like, don't you think we could, don't you want bigger and better for what we have here?" And he's like, "Well, from where we came from, we have enough." And I've heard that in my family, probably in my community, of people being like, I think, happy with where they are because it's better than what they had. And now Vic has an opportunity in some ways to almost, his dad isn't there to kind of stop anymore, right? His dad was like, "Look, we got enough. This is where we're gonna live. This is what we have." Now Vic has an opportunity, unfortunately by way of crime, with the Penguin, but to supersede what his dad was talking about and get the bigger everything that he has. When Oz gives him that he said $1,000 for doing what? You know what I'm saying? For driving? You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't do anything. And so I think that that does something to him. And so seeing how potentially Oz can, not say, I wouldn't say fatherly figure yet, but have some of those qualities, and some of those conversations with Vic to make him go, "Wait, my dad would have said no to this, but you say yes to this? Hell yeah, I'll do that thing," because I've always wanted to explore what that might look like. I think that's genius in the way of that, man. And we'll see the what Vic goes through overall by the push and pull. Like you said, he's not all the way in yet. There's a lot of push and pull. I feel like his dad is on one shoulder and Oz is on another shoulder almost. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of what it feels like now at this point. But yeah, I think they did a good job kind of having those threads, I think, of fatherhood in the show.
Well, let's go even further with that, because again, I think this all ties into just like the type of place that Gotham is as well, because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things about it is just it is the line of work. It's the fact that Vic is going down what appears to be a very dangerous life, a life of crime, obviously working alongside Penguin, where his father, his entire family did something that I guess people would quote unquote consider more honorable, or
Yeah.
something of that sense. And ultimately there's the big conversation towards the end of this episode to where Oz and Vic have a blow up. It looks like that Vic
Mm-hmm.
might actually duck out, and go with his girlfriend to leave for California. Oz catches him and he sees like, "Oh, you're leaving here," and they have it out with each other. And ultimately Vic is like, this probably isn't right that I'm doing this, you know,
Mhm.
and I could go and do this, but also I'm still like thinking about it. I haven't even made up my mind. We see he's still very much conflicted about it, and
Yeah.
Oz just gives it to him. He just lays it in like, you know, you think that there's a good and bad. There's no difference. Like it just is what it is. This is the type of world that we live in. Like get real, get realistic about this place. Gotham is ultimately a place where from what we've seen in pretty much all media, like there's very little options in terms of how to make it and how to make it big without getting your hands
Mhm.
dirty. Like it's a
Mhm.
place that's born and bred, and it's just meant to be a mirror of like American culture and capitalism. But it's very much that
Yeah.
sentiment that hey, there is no good and bad, there is no evil and good. Like there just is. This is just what we have, and we're all figuring out how to navigate that situation and ultimately how to get what's coming to us.
Mm.
And I think Oz in that sequence, in that little monologue, communicates it more effectively than I've seen in a lot of these types of shows or films where it's like, yeah, you kind of got a point, you know, like can we really condemn these characters for doing like terrible
Mhm.
things when the environment itself it's breeding these type of people.
Yeah.
It goes back to that idea that, you know, a lot of Batman's villains tend to be somewhat more sympathetic figures because
Mhm.
they become who they are due to the circumstances of like what's happening around them in the city or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Just the criminal underbelly, just the wicked nature of Gotham. That's like Ra's al Ghul's whole thing. Like Gotham needs to be
Mhm.
destroyed. It cannot
Yep.
be repaired. But Batman is supposed to be that figure, that avatar to say like, no, there's still hope. So how did you feel about that sequence? Because I thought it was the best sequence of the whole episode. It was incredible to just see them two go at it. But again, I think it presents those questions to us once again, just about the morality of it all and what you should or should
Yeah.
not be doing, especially considering Vic as a character not coming from that type of background. Like he comes from a pretty decent home, a stable life until it wasn't. And now he's choosing actively to kind of go down a path of crime.
It's crazy to see again the ramifications of what the Riddler has done to this city. It's it's like hurt people hurting people, hurt people hurt people. It's like a villain making people making more villains. You know what I'm saying? Of what this thing he has done because he has left so many people out to dry, or people have died and now there's probably widows, widowers, orphans, all of these things who have no means of getting money. They have to turn to crime. Like you said, that's the place Gotham is now, and Penguin has recognized that and been a part of that for so long. He's telling Vic like kind of what else you gonna do, and I think that's what also that internal monologue Vic is having with himself. He's like, if I go with Gabriella, I think it's her name, I think it's Gabriella. He's like, if I go with Gabriella, I might not even have an opportunity to an opportunity like I have now to have money, to have things that my family never had before. In some ways, I think his intentions are being twisted to live for his family again, but unfortunately by the way of crime. And so I really like this conversation because it's all about choices. Penguin is like, you technically never had to be here. You thought I would. Of course, I'm sure episode one he felt like that, right? Like he was, he was like, "Boy, you better come with me and help me bury this body. I could kill you right here, but I'm not going to." But after that, in some ways, he is kind of gaslighting them, though. Like, you don't have to be here. You could have left at any time. What's up? What's going on? And he, like you said, he does choose to leave in that moment. But yeah, it's all about choices, man. It's like, what choice is Vic going to make? Is going to make the choice for him? Is going to make the choice for his expired family? Is going to make the choice for Gabriella? Is going to make the choice for Penguin? Like it's so much toss up in that moment in this conversation, and in Vic or in Penguin feels betrayed in that moment too. It's like, dude, I gave you all these things, now what are you going to do? So yeah, it's very much a budding toxic relationship that I imagine a lot of gangster figures probably have with their other subordinates, right? With their underlings, of like, most of them feel like they can't leave or they're going to die. But you as the boss probably have this such an overarching presence. How would I feel like I can leave if I watch you shoot oh boy yesterday in the face? Why do I think I can leave? I think it's such an interesting dynamic to have with somebody. But it's crazy that Vic does kind of walk away, and in some ways Penguin probably would have let him go. But it was, like you said, it's a very good conversation, man. It was so many layers and so many things there, but it was only like 5 minutes. I was like, dang, this is crazy.
Yeah, and to that point, that's why I said that this would typically happen in like the later seasons of a show. I mean, this is clearly supposed to be sort of a stand-in for this show. We talk about the Sopranos, references all the time, but in the Sopranos, Christopher, who is sort of
Mm-hmm.
the son to Tony Soprano's sort of fatherly figure. There's a point in the show where he tries to pursue a career in acting and filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like he might be really close. Like he actually has good ideas. He starts a production company. He's behind a movie. He's very passionate about it. He talks about what's my story, what's my arc, where am I going to go? And then there's that pivotal moment in the show where, it looks like he might have an opportunity to leave and he shows up at Tony's home and then
Mm-hmm.
he just kind of sits there and remains and stays and doesn't take that next step. And it's heartbreaking because that that's probably the last chance he would have ever had to get out, quote unquote, of the lifestyle, but he chooses not
Exactly.
to. Um, and it's so earned. And I think that, with this particular moment, it's the same sort of sentiment that's presented to Vic, who can go and have this new life with his old girlfriend and start
Mm-hmm.
over, be in a completely new environment. But it's often, a feeling of I don't at least feel like I can do that because I fear you to some extent and I fear what you may do to me and my livelihood. But also at the same time, there is a part of him that just wants more, and
Yeah.
wanting more at this time requires him to just continue down the path that he's, sort of already been set on. And it's such an interesting dynamic to explore for Vic as a character, because I don't know, just with the way it's setting up, I don't know if he'll I don't know, man. I don't know if he'll make it out of this, at the end of it all, because it
Mm-hmm.
might be more of a tragic story in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're seeing early on, like you really had an out if you wanted to, but ultimately he did not go down that way. I do want to talk about another aspect of it though, like just quickly with like Oz and Sophia, their
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, their team up. We see a lot go down here. They're trying to become these big new distributors. They ultimately come across this new drug. They get the support of the triads after they blackmail Vidi. All that stuff
Yeah.
happens. But the sequence in the club, this again, I think adds to what Vic is experiencing. He's designated as like the guy, the point person,
Mm-hmm.
who can be responsible for the drops that have to happen within the club, and so Oz gives the big speech to all the lady lieutenants essentially that are going to be distributing the drug. Obviously, it's doing really, really well. People like it, people are taking it. And Vic is the guy who is responsible for the cash and ultimately the re-ups for the drops that they're doing here. So he gets a sense of power and responsibility too, and
Mm-hmm.
belonging, and it's a sexy looking sequence, with the lights and the music and stuff. But I think it does a good job at just like showcasing, like, oh, we see what his role is. Like, he's not just driving him around, that's a piece of it, but he's actually being entrusted with a very, very important thing, because this is going to essentially establish Oz and Sophia as major players within this whole thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was just like a cool sequence to like add in before we kind of got to the true crossroads that Vic had to deal with more later in the episode.
Yeah, it was a smart thing to do, right? Because that, in some ways, that's the thing you're supposed to look back at and be like, "Dang, is Vic going to leave?" He just got, I think, some ego strokes. You know what I'm saying? He just became the man, and all of a sudden, he's kind of being asked to leave as soon as he's getting all this praise from Oz, as soon as he's getting all this praise from the girls, as soon as he takes a club and turns them all into, gets them addicted, I guess, to this drug in this moment. He just did this stuff, and now he's kind of being asked to leave. I think it's kind of a hard thing to do. All the timing of it all, I think, is very difficult for him. So I thought it was really smart as well, man. But he has his backpack and all these other things. And one of the other brilliant things I think they do in this episode that I really, really, really like is giving Vic PTSD. I think they do such a good job of giving him PTSD because, of course, you would have PTSD if you heard some bombs go off, a flood happened, and your family got killed. Hell yeah, you'd have PTSD. And so being around all those people, and I think that made a ton of sense as well. So it's like it's constantly counteracting the good with the bad. It's almost like, yeah, sure, you may be the big man and all of this stuff, but that badness in Gotham, that leechy darkness that Gotham has, is also part of the reason for your PTSD. And now you are acting in that same darkness. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, but it makes for a complicated character, and I think they're doing a good job at it.
100%. And the final moments of this episode kind of complete the really quick journey that we went on. Ultimately, the Maronis show up at the club, and they are holding both Sophia and Oz at gunpoint, and it looks like that they could very well meet their end here because the Maronis are fully intent on taking them out, considering what they're doing and the moves that they're making within this whole thing, this whole sort of upheaval of the Falcone crime family. They put a gun to their head, and ultimately tell them like, yeah, we've been watching you this whole time. Like we know what's happening here. And we see Vic comes back speeding in Oz's car. He ultimately runs over one of the gunmen. Oz gets in the car and tells him, leave now. And Vic asks a really, really important question. Well, what about Sophia? And
Mm-hmm.
Oz like, fuck that. We leave. Like, we're out of here. And that's not going to be good because in the heat
Nope.
of the moment, again, we're trying to see this trust and this established relationship between Oz and Sophia. And when the heat is on, really on the most, for either one of them throughout the show, Oz chooses to ultimately save himself and sacrifice her if it requires him to do so. So that's not going to be good. And that's obviously going to create a big, big rift between these two,
Mm-hmm.
one that they probably won't be able to see their way back from. But how did you feel about that moment, just knowing he made that decision? And ultimately, again, I think it's probably alluding to the fact that, yeah, kind of this honeymoon stage that Oz and Sophia were experiencing, well, that's over. It didn't last long, but it's over really before it even ever got started. And even more so because like the Maronis have, they've really been following this whole thing. So they didn't even
Mm-hmm.
really have a legitimate chance to kind of get their feet off of the ground before things just completely blew up in their face.
Man, I tell you, if Sophia wasn't really the hangman before, because she denies it, she finna be the hangman now. Let me tell you, because they just had this heartfelt conversation, like you said, and they just made up about all of this. Yes, I left you, but I don't regret anything. And they made up and they did all, and history just repeated itself. History just Oz then left her in the dust again. And she is not going to be okay with that any little bit. And so I can't wait to see the repercussions of this. I thought it was a very interesting way to spend the episode so quickly too. Like you said, this honeymoon phase thing didn't last long. Like Bliss did well in the club that night. Now all of a sudden you left your partner. Damn, like what is, I don't know how he's gonna find his way out of this one. Like part of me feels like Oz is going to end up being at war with everybody because I just don't see a world where Sophia lets this slide. And so it's like, damn, now already about to be episode 4 is about to be cracking like this. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what's going to happen, but I think I just think that's an interesting choice for Oz to leave Sophia behind. But now I think at this point, I think Victor and Oz's relationship is a little bit more cemented. Oz feels like he can count on Victor. He'll probably start to give Victor more things because of this. But now Sophia also knows to use Victor too. Sophia knows Victor now. He knows what he looks like, and so she might end up using him in order to get to. I don't know what's going to happen, but it just got messy really fast. And again, in like another 5 minutes is all it took for these people to get held at gunpoint for Victor to run his car into them, man. So yeah, it's getting interesting out here.
Yeah, it was just so crazy. I was just like, wow, we're already here. And what's even more crazy about it is that, Oz and Sophia, they made a good team. They established things really, really
They
quickly.
did.
They were able to get what they want. They're good negotiators. They were, I think that they were able to
Mm-hmm.
accomplish a lot in a little. And we saw, how well the Bliss drug was doing in the club and what that could have looked like, if they could have kept this up, would have been interesting to see. But probably was no realistic scenario in which that could have happened just because both of them kind of individually, especially Oz, have just screwed over so many people. It's almost it's
Mm-hmm.
impossible. It's becoming increasingly impossible for them to maintain the lie, maintain the illusion, for Oz to keep playing all sides of it. Eventually people are going to wise up and know like what's going on here. So it kind of ended the way that it needed to at this particular point. But next week does look like it'll point to, at least according to the preview of next week's episode, that we're going to see a lot of what made Sophia the hangman or why she was deemed that. They showed a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sequences of her in Gotham. There were a few scenes of, Oz being her driver at one point in time, which they allude to earlier in this episode. So I guess we'll get
Yep.
to see more of like how they came to be and maybe that first time that he ultimately kind of betrayed her and left her out to dry. Any thoughts, hopes, expectations for all of the stuff that we'll explore in what appears to be a very Sophia focused episode next week?
Nah, man, just let's just do it. Let's give us Sophia's psyche in who she was just before all of this went down. Like it seems like Arkham kind of added to a lot of her, the way she acts, the way we see her now, right? Literally Bliss comes from Arkham. You know what I'm saying? We're like, whoa, how did we get here? So I'm just interested to see Sophia, I think, before all the madness kind of went down. Like, let's see Sophia at her most not vulnerable isn't the word, but her most, I guess, untouched by all of this stuff kind of state. Like, I want to see her before everything went down, and as long as they give us that, which it looks like they will, I'll be happy, I think.
You think we're going to see Sophia break out into some song and dance routines in Arkham, like Arthur Fleck just did?
Hell no, hell no. It's gonna be the opposite. It's gonna be like drug trips or something. It's gonna be
Oh
like
man,
something crazy. Yeah, because if it's anything like Bliss is going up, right? You know what I'm saying? They in there Eisenberging off some mushrooms. It's
yeah.
kind of crazy. So if they was giving them that in Arkham, I can only imagine why everybody in Arkham is so loony.
Yeah, yeah, not for sure. Yeah, it would be interesting if Penguin just turned into a musical out of nowhere. What would that look like? But I think that they won't go down that route. They know better. They know what they're doing here. So
Matt
I'm
Reeves
excited to
would
see.
never.
Oh no,
He would throw a fit.
he would
Matt
walk
Reeves would
away.
throw a fit.
He'd walk away as quickly as Chris Nolan did. Guarantee you that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens on next week's episode of The Penguin. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on episode 3 entitled Bliss of the DC series and the HBO series The Penguin. If you've seen it, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.